we're lucky to have both an interesting topic and an incredibly qualified panel today to start talking about it. I would, at the risk of not being invited back because I'm doing the lunch plenary with all the commissioners, I'd probably say this is the smartest panel at Verde Exchange at this conference. I know all these folks, and just to give you just a little bit of background before we engage, at the far end we have Robin Beavers, who's been a senior executive with Google and NRG and a bunch of other stuff, and she's an engineer, civil, I think,
Civil, yeah.
and has an MBA and is one of the smartest people I know. And I know she looks younger than my daughter, but she's incredible. Next to Robin, Steve Powell, who's VP of Planning and Strategy and a bunch of other stuff for Southern California Edison. I think I met Steve pretty much when he came in the company, or very close to it. Steve is another brilliant guy, also an engineer, chemical engineer, and has an MBA, both from UCLA, because as bright as he couldn't get into USC. A little bias there. and next to Steve is Evan Birnbaum, who is co-founder of a groundbreaking young firm called Chai Energy that's providing data analytics in an understandable way to residential customers as well as businesses. They've done some really amazing software stuff. He's also an expert in things I don't understand, like blockchain and Bitcoin, and we'll talk more about all of those. And Evan shared in a prior panel today that the best lecture he ever had on energy was in 5th grade from Miss Howard. You can tell us about that. And finally, last but certainly not least, is Commissioner Andrew McAllister. And Dr. McAllister is, for those of us who've been in this industry for a long time, you'll get it. I always say he's the intellectual son of Art Rosenfeld, the great Art Rosenfeld, who was really, I feel, the father of energy efficiency in California. Wonderful man. And Andrew was smart enough and passionate enough to step in those footsteps, serving on the Energy Commission since 2012, I think. And has really become the dean of energy efficiency in the state of California. Most of the great programs, and we have the best programs, at least in America, if not in the world, for energy efficiency, come out of that guy's head, and he helps get them implemented. And he's got a doctorate in something or other. I don't even remember what, but he's a really smart guy as well. So we have an amazing panel. Now here's the topic. And we thought it was kind of clever. We said, megawatts meet megabytes. And really it's because when you look out there in the press today, there's a ton of stuff about, your Facebook, something will pop up, you can have free energy. I saw a great one that some guy had electrodes connected to a Coke bottle. I don't even know what that was about. There's all these claims, perpetual motion machines, basically, things that violate the laws of physics. A bunch of hype, but here in California, we have the advantage that we've invested so much money and so much time over the years through a lot of programs and incentives that we have real research doing real things to sort of transform the energy landscape. I'll give you an example. And I tried this question, by the way, in Atlanta, Georgia, about 2 weeks ago. How many of you have LED lights in your home? Now, I tried that in Atlanta, Georgia, and one hand went up. One. Very different, right? Because we almost take it for granted that we can't imagine. I mean, it's hard to even find an incandescent bulb, right? We've made a lot of that transformation as a result of the good work here. But as I read everything that we're seeing today, and I look at my own life. I showed someone in the hallway that I've got a Nest app, a SunPower solar system app, and a Chai Energy app on my phone. Well, I'm kind of a nerd, but still, I'm looking at what my house is doing while I'm here on my phone, right? What do we see as a common theme when we look at everything transformational that's happening in the market? We see the intersection, head-on crash between what we used to call the IT world, right? Computing and communication, with the energy world. where now everything we do is enabled by information, by data that becomes information that somehow interfaces with us in our daily lives. So it's all a play now about Internet of Things, about blockchain. I still don't know how blockchain works, but it sounds very cool. And bitcoins, which I know use more power than the cannabis industry, and which is using a lot of power, and electrification vision that you're going to be hearing about at lunchtime at our plenary session. But all of this stuff is about this big intersection between sort of the world of the internet and information with the energy world. And we're going to have a dialogue about that, get some questions from all of you. And I'm going to, in no particular order, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to talk a little bit about what they're seeing in this sort of bold new world that's got all these new acronyms, IoT, integrated solutions, net zero, all of it. How is this evolving, and how are we integrating this across the space of our lives, whether at home or in business? So, Robin, you want to go first? You're not shy.
Sure.
Okay.
Happy to. Hi, everyone. So just as an aside, I've been attending Verde Exchange for many, many years now, and I've heard several times this Verde Exchange that people have a hard time keeping up with what my job is, because every time I come, I seem to have a different one. But I think that's true, but also that means I've seen a lot and I've done a lot, and I think it's also representative of how this new industry of renewable energy and distributed energy has changed so much. It's a nascent, new, volatile industry. So finding new places to keep pushing it forward is part of the job in itself. And I think I preface that because what to me is very exciting is how it has evolved over time. In the beginning of my career, a lot of us were focused on how to get physical things implemented. Have enough money to put hardware in a building or in a field. And then as we progressed, it became a little bit, how do we put more of those things and maybe different things out in the field, and make sure they all kind of work together and meet all the rules that are out there. And now we're emerging into a time when a lot has changed, and for good, in my opinion. There's the regulatory frameworks have adjusted here in California, but elsewhere, in other states too, in other parts of the world, of course. And technology costs have plummeted thanks to a lot of the commercialization efforts over the last 10 to 15 years. And consumer awareness has expanded, whether the consumer is, a homeowner or, a municipality or, a company. And all of these things are aligning where now you can move from project by project decision making to true scalable platforms. And that's where kind of the digital nature of the new grid starts coming into play. And that's when stuff gets really interesting, because you can think about new business models, you can think about new pricing structures that actually are more dynamic and based on data and performance and market-based signals, and you can also perhaps provide better performance too, in ways that our new lifestyles need. So for me, it's Verde Exchange is a great timestamp too. All of these conferences tend to cause you to step back and look at what's happening and what's changing. And it all has really shifted towards the fact that we're re-electrifying the world around us with a digital grid. So that to me is a wonderful opportunity. However, it's also something that means you have new surprises probably coming down the road too that are you need to be aware of from a technical and business and political or policy standpoint. One, there's going to be all these new types of costs that come into our projects that we work so hard to get out. Telemetry equipment and the infrastructure and architecture that supports the movement of these megabytes around. Obviously, cybersecurity is going to become a major aspect of this. I used to, the first microgrid I ever designed and built which took several months, and we're really proud. And then one of my engineers said, okay, now I'm going to teach us all how to hack into it, and that took 30 minutes. Even though we literally were taught how to break into our system in 30 minutes, and then we all went and did it. So there's a lot of work to be done there, and a lot of, I think that's going to require a lot of money. So those are just like new concerns and things to focus on to keep pushing forward this new dynamic electrified world that we're all really pushing for right now.
Cool, thank you. Well, now Steve's got, I don't know if he has the best job or the worst job in all of this, because we all know that the grid was built as a one-way, a unidirectional, passive thing, right? That's how we all grew up, is you flipped the switch, the light came on, they sent you a bill and you paid it. If you didn't pay it, then the lights didn't come on. End of story. And now Robin's talking about, and I know our other panelists will, this massively interconnected, multi-directional, active participant network, but you're still the poor guy who's got to worry about the wires and the transformers and the meters, right? And the windstorm and all the other stuff that affects us. So can't wait to hear your perspective.
All right, that's my cue. So yes, the wires, the transformers, all that stuff is our business, and as is all of the customers, right? We serve everybody. There's not customers we leave behind. Everyone gets service, and so that means we're in the middle of all of this, everything that we're creating. SC's been focused on safe, reliable, affordable electricity, just like every other utility, for a very long time. Being in California, what that means today as well is it is part of our mission to help the state meet our greenhouse gas reduction objectives, air quality, and that means reducing carbon emissions by 40% by 2030, just 12 years away. That's a big change, and that's going to take all of our customers, all of our partners in this, the state, to really drive it. And so we, if you heard Laura earlier today, you're going to hear Kevin at lunch, we believe in what we call the clean power and electrification pathway. That means 80% carbon-free electric supply. It means at least 7 million electric vehicles on our roads in California by 2030, plus electrification of buses, delivery trucks, larger semis. So that's a huge piece in transportation. It means electrifying 30% of space and water heating in more efficient buildings over time. Those are major changes from where we are today. And you can't do it without technology, and you can't do it without digitally enabled technology. These things have to work together. If we just throw all this equipment out there and let it spread, you have no idea what you're going to end up with, and it's going to be impossible to manage. The grid's going to have, look, in California, more renewables, more carbon-free resources means more solar. There's going to be a lot more solar. There'll be mixes of other renewables as well, but solar is a huge issue. You're going to need a lot of storage. There's a lot of storage today. You're going to need orders of magnitude more, probably call it 10 gigawatts of storage statewide, flexible resource. But storage isn't just the lithium-ion stuff we're putting on the grid today. We need to look at other technologies, other forms, how to use vehicles. You need to look at longer duration storage. Can you manage energy seasonality? So there's lots of things that are changing at the bulk power system, at the distribution grid. You need sensors, automation, analytics to be able to let people exchange energy with other customers, to enable price signals so you can control load. So all of that is all backed by digital technologies. Think about solving the duck curve. So CAISO's duck curve, where by 2030, if all this plays out, you're likely to have more energy in the middle of the day than you have customers to serve. So that's not just going to be a bunch of storage. You also need to manage customer loads. You need to be able to charge your vehicle or heat your water in the middle of the day or at other times where you usually wouldn't. That requires price signals. It requires an orchestration of everything. So at SCE, we're focused on automating our grid to make sure we can manage the grid more safely and reliably. We're using our smart meter data to do things like proactively identifying before a transformer dies that it's going to fail and going out and proactively replacing it. How do you use smart meter data in a better way to manage your operations? Electric vehicle charging, so helping customers get EV charging for their light duty vehicles, helping fleets and large customers get charging out there so they can adopt electric buses, and when Tesla or Cummins semi-trucks come, we can do those too. Customer programs. So how do we make sure that our customer programs work with Chi Energy's app or a Nest or all the other things that customers are adopting? We're in the middle of all of that. Our data, our customers, so we have to make all of these things work together. So we don't develop everything, we're not going to deliver everything, but we have to be integrated and enabling all of it. The distribution grid and our backbone of internet connectivity behind it really becomes the thing that allows all of our integrated energy solutions to get into the hands of customers so that they can manage their costs better, so that they can meet their sustainability goals. So at SCE, I think our focus is on identifying what are the real technologies that are going to work and how do we put those to work for our customers. We're going to need it if we're going to help the state reduce carbon by 40% by 2030 and 80% by 2050, and help the state really become a model for how this is done for other states and other countries around the world.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Now, Evan, you're sort of in the entrepreneur, digitally enabled, grew up with a computer in your hands kind of space. How are you viewing it? How are your customers? Who are your customers? Are they all kids? Are they my kids, or are they old people like me? And how are they viewing it?
Well, you are one of our customers.
I am.
So, it's good. Yeah, I mean, so I worked at Edison during the smart grid deployment, and I kind of saw a new technology coming into a space that people really wouldn't understand. And I think today customers still don't really understand where their energy comes from, or what the value of energy data in general. So, but I mean, ultimately we have the largest IoT backbone that exists that nobody knows about, and that's really the smart grid. So I guess from my point of view, I mean, I'm building technologies now that leverage that infrastructure for the customer. Maybe a little bit more innovative than what we thought about initially in the design of smart grid. And I think the smart grid is going to advance itself, and certainly in the distribution space of energy. But we need to find ways to interact with energy usage as customers. I think that part of the meeting the goal really does lie on the customer. It's not all the utility's responsibility. You can't regulate in a vacuum either. People actually have to identify with some sort of goal. And that's something that I think is kind of a miss today, or a misconception. Customers don't necessarily feel like they have ownership possibly over their energy. Especially in California, we don't have a lot of choice today with rates, but the future really is to, try to create, I think, more of a story for the customer and have them identify with energy usage and those savings goals. And it really does start with data. We see it with our customers when someone downloads Chi app for the first time. We see that, a customer now visualizes energy usage on, let's call it a daily occurrence. And just within the first couple interactions, a customer might be able to see that their energy usage was high at a certain time. They could see the price of that energy, the cost of that energy, and we do see behavior change. We also see customers getting into electric vehicles, using our technology to understand when to best charge their vehicles, whether it's for some sort of green benefit or there's a cost component to it with a time of use rate. I think that, that data infrastructure, is important to certain customers. And, going back to your comment about age, I think for myself, I've been in the space now for about 9 years, did my stint at Edison, co-founded Chi.
Sounds like it's a bad thing.
It was a wonderful experience, and you can spend a lifetime in the utility space and never kick over every stone.
We call it purgatory.
Jim, it's perfect. But I think the point of it is that the journey, my journey in energy changed the day I bought my electric vehicle, which was about a year ago. And I began to think about energy in a different way, perceive energy usage in a different way. So, I'm not necessarily an old or young person anymore, but I think that as I continue to live, the way I identify with energy is changing. So we'll see what technology brings to the market. I think infrastructure upgrades are incredibly important. The innovation around what we've done in California, and thanks to the CEC for allowing and enabling a lot of the technology that exists today, it's fantastic. At the end of the day, I think it's about how we want to live our lives and the space that we live in, and maybe that is adaptive in a way that creates savings, more energy efficiency, a cleaner, better environment. But I think people don't really want to think about it that much. So
I'm going to follow up on that later. Well, thank you. And Andrew, you've got this unique role because you're personally an advocate for energy efficiency and known for that. But you've also been given sort of a fiduciary responsibility to be an overseer to make sure that California does right things, right? Economically right, socially right. I mean, that's really pretty tough in a marketplace that's exploding with new ideas that aren't always well integrated, disconnected thoughts, and you've got to sort of say, wait, we've got to make this all fit together. Tell us something about that.
So thanks, Jim. It's really a pleasure to be here. And let's see. I guess maybe I'll just start with a couple of short stories. You mentioned the incandescent, right? And sort of everybody raised their hand. A lot of people raised their hands. Way to go. You got some LEDs in your house. Well, California has a special place in regulating devices that are on the shelves at your Home Depot and your Lowe's and your Ace Hardware. Where you buy stuff is conditioned by what is legal to sell. So on January 1 of this year, basically incandescents that are produced after that date aren't going to be for your typical lamp shapes, your A lamp, your screw-in A lamp. They're not going to be on the shelf to be bought in California. It's because there's a backstop that went into, an efficiency backstop that went into effect on January 1 of 45 lumens per watt. Which there are many, many technologies that can absolutely meet that, but incandescents are not one of those technologies. So, but incidentally, that's a federal law that was signed into law by George W. Bush. So this can be bipartisan. 10 years ago, 2007, 11 years ago now, and it gave California the disposition to start that backstop. If DOE, Department of Energy, missed some milestones in doing some rulemakings, which they missed, then California was able to adopt this backstop of efficiency 2 years before the rest of the country. So this same thing will happen in the rest of the country in 2 years. By that time, the market will be even more transformed than it is today. So we're just sort of taking advantage of trends to harvest savings for the good of California. It's completely cost effective. There's no downside. The market's ready. The technology's ready. There's no reason just to not go LEDs all the way. So we're doing it, right? And we're doing it in a process that is open and transparent.
By the way, Andrew, because it strikes me so much, he said something really important you might have missed, right? You notice they didn't mandate LEDs. Did you catch that subtlety? They mandated efficiency standards. If an incandescent maker could meet your standard, they could sell in California, right?
Yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, the manufacturers chose not to do more research on incandescents to meet this, this backstop that was pretty far out there still, because they realized it was a sort of an uphill battle and that they weren't likely to win. So they went with, a wide variety of companies formed to focus on LEDs. The CFL experience, the curlicue compact fluorescent experience was not altogether positive. They were definitely more efficient, but they were sort of a hardship, thing that you did because the lighting quality wasn't that great and they didn't come on. They had downsides. LEDs have none of those downsides. So that's a huge success story in terms of just technology solving some of our problems in a way that creates all sorts of co-benefits that have little or nothing to do with energy. So we need more of those kinds of solutions. I actually am familiar, on my phone right now, I have this app called My Green Car. Has anybody heard about this thing? It is awesome. And so basically it's kind of in a beta version, but you carry your phone around, it tracks your patterns, knows how far you drive, where you drive, kind of gets information about that. And then when it gets enough information, it tells you, it doesn't tell you which car to buy, but it ranks cars in terms of cost of operation based on your own lived experience. And usually, by far, the lowest cost car to drive is going to be in one of the EVs that's coming out, that's now on the market. And so, but it informs you in a way that's in the background, and it's very, high tech in its own way, but really easy and very low transaction cost for the user. We need more solutions like that. So I want to just make a few points about data. It's hugely important. So I'm sitting in a regulator, I'm a regulator, and back in the day, in the Art Rosenfeld days, the Energy Commission was really the place that people came for data about energy consumption, load shapes, sector by sector, different geographies. It was back in the days of kind of dot matrix printers and Lotus 1, 2, 3. Then we had restructuring. A lot of that got offloaded. A lot of the collaboration that we had with the utilities, like Edison, that all got jettisoned. We're batting down the hatches for competition, and anything that's not just has to be done, then we're not going to do it. And so we lost a good decade in there in terms of just where data was not getting collected in the ways that it had been. And so there's a discontinuity. So flash forward, we've got AMI most places. We have interval data available in a lot of places. And so the Energy Commission is jumping back in the game, really to be more muscular, for our own purposes, for policy and planning. And I'll mention why this is. We're sort of building the analytical tools and the data flows to be much, much more policy relevant, and to turn around with aggregated data, push some of it out in the marketplace to help the marketplace function. So that's kind of the role that I'm in now, to kind of modernize the agency and make it useful. Because as everybody has said, the market is going to solve, or implied at least, the market is going to have to solve these problems. We can't mandate everybody do certain upgrades in their existing buildings. We live in a democracy. So we have to work to get people enough information so that they can see a value proposition in doing the right thing, because in ways that go along with our policies. So I think information is really kind of number one. And so many of you may be familiar with SB 350 law passed a few years ago, required 50% renewable portfolio standard. Another thing it required was doubling of energy efficiency. So that's my life, figuring out how we can get the marketplace, how we can get efficiency doubled. And so, data, it needs to be a resource for the forecast. It needs to be a relevant resource for the ISO when they do their long-term planning. And so really buttoning up efficiency and characterizing it as a resource in a rigorous, robust way requires much, much more data and analytical tools than we've traditionally had. And so that's the problem that we're engaging with and solving at the Energy Commission. We're well into it. It's going to take a couple of years, but I'm very optimistic that it's going to help us solve our problems. The last point I'll make, so there's an equity aspect to this too. I hope we talk about some of the low-income issues, because they're incredibly important and a fundamental part of SB 350. The last thing I'll say is that energy efficiency is starting to look a lot like demand response. So if we're talking about the grid, the duck curve and sort of real-time appreciation of the ebbs and flows in the distribution network, when people invest in efficiency, those products need to come along with more responsiveness. Communications, they need to be, this digitization of the energy economy is definitely a key part of this solution. So, our buildings really are our batteries. You can do a lot with a building. That means you don't have to invest in more hardware if you just run it smartly. You pre-cool it, or you manipulate the load in a way that the occupants don't notice. You can get a lot of cheap benefits to the grid by doing those sorts of things, and all it is smart technology with very little, forward investment, not necessarily. So I think the rates, I'll just say, therefore, I always come back to rates. the rate environment, the rates that you face as a customer need to motivate you in ways that align with policy, and currently that's not the case. You know, the TOE, we're going kind of time of use, it's kind of a blunt instrument, but really we need rates that are much more reflective of the grid needs at the moment. And so if we were to get there, then there would be a lot more value ready to be harvested by companies like these, and you know, innovators would come out of the woodwork to help customers with, you know, sort of harvest that value. So I think, you know, again, data is really important, and access to communications in a standard way is really important for unlocking those values, those opportunities. So I guess I'll stop there.
Cool, thank you. Well, we never have enough time at a Verde Exchange panel, but I'm going to throw out a handful of ideas that I jotted down that I think some of you were thinking, and you brought up one of them, Andrew. So this whole issue of equity, of justice, of low-income people living in multifamily housing who don't have capital. In many cases, they're not being provided information because people aren't marketing to them because they're not low-hanging fruit. Right? How do we take all of this digital world and all this whiz-bang stuff and get it to the people who in many ways need it most in the current structure? Where are the incentives? Where are the programs? How are we going to do that? And who pays for it?
Yeah. So those are questions that I'm not going to purport to have a full answer to. But SB 350 has asked us to try to solve this problem, and we've come up with a lot of good recommendations. We put out this barriers report. Low-income barriers to energy efficiency and solar. Multifamily is it's a tough nut to crack, and even more so low-income multifamily. You know, I'm of the opinion that we really have to engage much more effectively and proactively with the building owners, because, you know, the vast majority, you know, LA is sort of renter central. You've got a lot of large multifamily buildings, big garden apartment properties. And the decision maker is often primarily the owner of those properties. They're the ones that would invest in the infrastructure. On the low-income front, you know, you have the financing of low-income properties is quite complex and quite specialized. But what happens typically is that they get rehabilitated every 15 years. It's the only time the tenants are out of the building. It's the only time that major renovations are getting done. Otherwise, it's kind of incremental, which is also fine. But really, we're going to get a big bang for the buck. We're going to decarbonize buildings with hardware investment and technology only when you can really go deep. And that's going to be about every 15 to 20 years in many hundreds of multifamily properties across the state. So I think we need to figure out a way to kick in some money and make the financing work to be able to do deeper investment and deeper projects to make these buildings really optimized for the future. So it's a conversation that's in process, but I think it's on more and more people's radar screen, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to fund, you know, I'm not sure which pot of money, you know, whether it's GGRF money or some other funds that come out of a budgeting process. But eventually, I'm confident we'll be able to get there and at least solve part of the problem that way.
Can I?
Please.
So I think one way to look at the fact that digital technology and software and data is now relevant in the world that we all like to talk about. It's not that it's there. It's that the environment is set up so it makes sense to bring all those things in, and then along with that. Our new incentive structures, like the possibility of aligning incentives differently for how you make money off of distributed energy and who does, and how that can attract the influx of capital, accelerate the rate of adoption and scaling a lot of this infrastructure, and evolving how the different parties are involved. And I think. And the question about like certain types of customers and whether they can participate in this or not, I don't know if that's, it might not be as direct of a question as it previously has. It can be, if there's like an incentive design structure that is possible to, like we said, attract capital into whether it's a regional grid, certain types of buildings or certain types of end users. And I think that's what's really interesting when you have a true dynamic, intelligent platform where we're all heading versus, maybe how it had to be built the first time around. So I think, again, we're talking very like tech heavy concepts, but what that enables is like a new paradigm around incentives and capital and who is seeking it and who's providing it and who's benefiting from it. So I know that's very vague, but I actually think that addresses a question like how can we make sure, customers aren't interrupted or, they're not left out in this evolution. It might almost, there are new opportunities to think differently about how to deliver this new infrastructure and these new services. So I think that's a big part of what, a new digital platform offers.
Let me throw out a different spin, mostly for Steve here. I don't know about all of you, but other than those real life tragedies, right? Your dog dies, your kid gets sick, your elderly uncle dies. I mean, those are real tragedies. But in your normal life, what is the worst thing that can happen to you in your day? The internet. The internet goes down, right? Doesn't that just destroy your day? Right? And you're calling and you're going to Starbucks and you're desperate and my God, the world will end if I don't get internet. How much do you worry at Southern California Edison as you're trying to integrate all of this stuff we're talking about? How much do you worry about cybersecurity, about somebody bringing it all down? Whether they're in Russia or China or maybe they're in Van Nuys, some smart kids. How much do you worry about it?
Well, if the worst day is when your internet goes out, just take the electricity out first, and it'll be a little bit worse than just your internet going out. So it's a big deal. Being in California, having to address all these technologies, we are necessarily on the front end of a lot of this technology. As we've built the quote smart grid and put smart meters in, the investment in cybersecurity is a huge one. As you look forward, more connected devices is just more entry points for a cyber attack. It's not just the critical infrastructure we have on our grid, and there's massive implications of somebody hacking into that, but we are potentially, you're exposing yourself by allowing all of these connected devices, endpoints. And so, within our IT group, we've had a ton of work on cyber, and you can go look at our general rate case to see the types of things that we ask for. But we have to, at the national level, you go and you participate in hackathons, and you participate in, really with Department of Defense and others to figure out, what are all the angles people could come get us, and it's one of the biggest challenges because our industry, we have a high need for great cybersecurity, but it's the talent and the skill to make it happen is very sought after. Mm-hmm. And so every industry has to be a lot more cognizant of cyber, and so there's just a dearth of talent to make it go. But it's a huge issue for us.
And it's scary. I'll tell you just an anecdote before we close that how the world has changed is that 15 years ago, I think, when I was vice president of engineering at Edison, one of the things I found is that we had thousands of these relays, Schweitzer laboratory relays, throughout the whole system. And I said, naively, new to that job, well, how do we protect people from messing with them? And they said, well, they're password protected. I said, well, how do you do that? And they said, well, the password for all of them is password. All of them, right? That is no longer the case, I assure you. But nobody worried about it just 15 years ago because nobody hacked anything. Imagine how our world has changed. We're almost out of time, and I'm keeping you from the lunch, the really good lunch presentation, I think. But let me ask Evan one follow-up, because you sort of implied, you didn't directly say it, but you said, people maybe don't really care all that much about how green it really is and how this, and they really care about what does it cost, right? Do I save money if I do it? Is that really the panel's perception that when all is said and done, aside from us nerds who really love this stuff, that most people are saying, bottom line, are you going to save me money? Is that really where they come from?
I think in some regards, there's two types of customers. I think there's kind of the bleeding edge customer that will go green, doesn't matter the cost. understands the value, might engineer the value in their way of life. And then there's customers that just want service and they don't want to be bothered with anything else. And I think we need to find kind of that in between where we can provide the green benefit to people that may not be thinking about it, and at a low cost, and be able to deliver a reliable service. And now I just wish we lived in a world where everyone cared about the environment. It's just not the case, And I think as time has gone on, I think people are starting to believe more in sustainability. I remember that word was taboo for a while, even in the utility space. It's because everyone thought that the green choice just costed more money. It's not the case. It's not the case anymore, anyway. So, I'd like to see a future where it's only the green choice and it's always affordable. And I think that's where some of this technology, really does begin to take shape. The Nest thermostat, it's very cool. Is it an energy saver? Well, it turns off when you're not home. I think that's great. If people just flip their thermostat off, maybe the Nest thermostat didn't have to have that feature. But so there's a convenience, to green with that product. Chai was designed, I think first to inform customers of options, and it's really neat to see, what options a customer takes to be green or to save money. We see both sides of the equation. We see economic drivers to savings, and there's a benefit there, and we see people wanting to track solar, make their homes more energy efficient, get a larger ROI. But there's no one single theme to any of this. I think people want choice and convenience, and that's kind of just some underlying things to any technology. You can't ram technology down someone's throat. They got to want it, and a lot of times people don't know what they want, so you just got to deliver something that works.
That was a pretty damn good closing statement for this panel, wasn't it? Would you join me in thanking our panelists?